I thought it was just my reflection in the window that night, until it smiled back at me and I wasn't smiling. My name's James, and I just moved into this weathered cottage in Cornwall, a lonesome place teetering on cliffs where the sea roars day and night like a restless beast. I'd come here seeking quiet after years in the city, drawn by the promise of solitude, the rugged beauty of the coast. The cottage was old, centuries old, the estate agent had said, its stone walls pitted with age, its windows small and warped, rattling in their frames. That first night, a storm rolled in from the Atlantic, fierce and unrelenting. Rain hammered the roof, streaking the glass in wild, silvery trails, and the wind howled through every crack, whistling like a mourner's cry. I'd lit the fireplace, the only source of warmth in that drafty room, and settled into an armchair with a chipped mug of tea, the steam curling up in faint wisps. The flames danced, casting jagged shadows that flickered across the uneven walls, and I felt a strange prickle on my neck, a sensation I couldn't shake, like unseen eyes boring into me. That's when I glanced up, past the fire's glow, to the window across the room, and saw it. A face, pale as death, wide-eyed, staring through the rain at me. At first, I thought it was my own reflection, twisted by the storm and the warped glass. But then its lips curled into this slow, grotesque grin, revealing teeth, sharp, jagged, too many to count. I wasn't smiling. My breath caught, a cold puff in the chilly air. The mug trembled in my hands, tea sloshing over the rim, and I set it down with a clink that echoed too loudly in the quiet. It had to be a trick of the light, I told myself. My mind frayed from the move, the long drive down winding coastal roads, the exhaustion settling into my bones. But I couldn't tear my eyes away. The face lingered unblinking, its grin stretching wider, unnatural, predatory, like it knew something I didn't, some secret it was savoring. My heart started thudding, a heavy, frantic rhythm against my ribs, and I fumbled for the torch on the mantel, my fingers clumsy with nerves. The beam cut through the dimness, shaking as I aimed it at the window. The face didn't flinch, just stared back, its black eyes glinting like wet stones, reflecting the light in a way that made my stomach twist. I stepped closer, boots scuffing, the worn floorboards, and pressed a hand to the glass. The cold bit into my palm, sharp and unrelenting, and I squinted into the storm beyond. Nothing. Just rain lashing the cliffs, wind tearing at the gorse, the sea churning below. No figure, no face, just the night, wild and empty. Relief flooded me, thin and shaky, and I let out a brittle laugh, the sound swallowed by the storm. I turned back to the fire, rubbing my hands together, willing my pulse to slow, convincing myself it was nothing. Then it came, a tap, faint, deliberate, like a finger on the glass behind me. My stomach lurched, a sickening drop. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed not to, but my head turned anyway, slow, dread coiling tight in my chest. The face was back. Closer now, its nose almost pressed to the pane, its grin splitting wider, showing gums that glistened red and raw in the torchlight. Tap, 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 louder now, insistent like nails dragging across the window, slow and purposeful. I stumbled back, the torch slipping from my grip, clattering to the floor with a dull thud. The beam spun wildly, throwing jagged shadows across the room, and I saw it. The silhouette of that face stretching along the wall, impossibly long, distorted, its grin curling into the corners like ink spilling over paper. My breath came in shallow gasps, fogging in front of me, and I lunged for the door, wrenching it open. The storm hit me full force, rain stinging my face like needles, wind clawing at my jacket. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice ragged, lost in the gale. The cliffs threw it back, a mocking echo. "There, there, there." But no one answered. I staggered into the mud, torch beam slicing through the downpour, searching the shadows, the rocks, the edge, where the land dropped to the sea. Nothing. No footprints in the sodden earth, no sign of life, just the relentless storm. I stumbled back inside, soaked to the bone, my boots squelching on the floor. Slammed the door shut, fumbled with the lock, my hands trembling so hard I could barely turn the key. The fire had dimmed, embers glowing faintly, and the room felt colder, heavier, like the air itself was watching. I sank into the chair, panting, my mind racing. Had I imagined it? Was it the isolation? The storm? My own exhaustion twisting shadows into nightmares? I wanted to believe that. Needed to. The fire crackled, spitting a spark onto the hearth, and I almost laughed again. Almost, until the scratching started. Slow, rhythmic, deliberate, like something carving into the glass. A sound that crawled under my skin. My blood turned to ice. I didn't want to look. God, I didn't. But I had to. Forced my eyes up, and there it was again. That face, its eyes blacker than the night beyond, its grin a gaping wound splitting its pallid flesh. And then it spoke. Whispered my name, James, in a voice I felt rather than heard, low and guttural, reverberating through the walls, sinking into my bones like damp rot. I froze, every muscle locked, staring as it pressed closer, the glass fogging where its breath, if it breathed, touched it. The scratching grew louder, sharper, a screech now like it was clawing its way in. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Stayed by the fire, torch clutched tight, jumping at every gust, every creak of the cottage. The storm raged on, battering the walls, and every howl sounded like that voice calling me back to the window, taunting me. I told myself it was over when the rain stopped at dawn, when the first gray light crept over the cliffs. Packed my things. That week, fled to a flat in London, a cramped, noisy place, but safe, I thought. Distance would fix it. Bury it. I was wrong. Last night I stood in my bathroom brushing my teeth under the flickering fluorescent light, the hum of the city faint beyond the walls. I glanced in the mirror, and there it was. That same face, smiling from the glass, closer than ever, its black eyes locked on mine. Tap, 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 soft, steady, from behind the mirror, echoing in the tiles. I dropped the toothbrush, stumbled back, my reflection swallowed by its grin. I don't know what it wants, why it's followed me across counties, across stone and steel. But it's here. Every night now I hear it, scratching, tapping, whispering my name. Last night I found smudges on the mirror, fingerprints that weren't mine, pressed into the glass like it's trying to break through. I don't turn off the lights anymore. I don't look at windows. I heard the church bell ring at midnight, but the village church had been abandoned for decades. My name's Eleanor, and I live in a quiet hamlet in Suffolk, a forgotten speck of a place where fields roll out to the horizon and ancient stone walls crumble under the weight of time. I'd moved here a year ago, chasing peace after a life that had grown too loud, too chaotic. The cottage I rented was small, its thatched roof sagging, its windows fogged with age, but it suited me and my books, my tea, my solitude. It was one of those nights where the silence wasn't just a lack of sound. It was a presence, thick and heavy, pressing against my ears until I could hear the faint thump of my own pulse. I'd gone to bed early, the quilt pulled tight around me, the air cool and damp from a day of drizzle. The clock on the bedside table glowed faintly, 11:55, and I was drifting, half lost in that hazy place between wakefulness and sleep, when it hit me, a single deep toll rolling through the dark like thunder. I jolted upright, sheets rustling, my breath catching in my throat. It came from the old church on the hill, a ruin I'd walked past countless times, its steeple sagging, its bell tower choked with ivy, silent since long before I was born. But there it was again, slow and mournful, a sound that didn't belong in the stillness. I sat there frozen, eyes wide, staring into the shadows of my room. The clock ticked, 11:57 now, and I told myself it was a dream, a remnant of sleep, clinging to my mind. Maybe a branch had fallen, struck something, mimicked the sound, but then it came again, louder, a deep clang that vibrated through the walls into my chest. My skin prickled, a shiver running down my spine. That church was a shell, locked tight, boarded up, its bell rusted and still for decades. No one could be ringing it. No one lived up there, no one went up there. Not since the last vicar left in the 50s, or so the villagers said over tea at the local shop. I'd laughed at their stories then, tales of strange lights, whispers on the wind, old superstitions from an older time. But now, lying there, the silence between tolls felt alive, watching me. The clock hit 11:59 and I held my breath, waiting. Midnight struck, and the bell tolled again, a sound so heavy it seemed to pull the air from the room. I couldn't stay. Still, curiosity, or maybe something darker, clawed at me, sharp and insistent. I swung my legs out of bed, the floorboards cold and rough under my bare feet. My coat hung by the door, a heavy wool thing I'd bought for Suffolk winters, and I pulled it on, the fabric scratching my skin. The lantern was there too, its glass smudged with soot, but it flickered to life when I struck a match, casting a weak, trembling glow. I stepped outside, the night swallowing me whole. No stars, no moon, just a vast inky blackness that pressed against my eyes. The air was damp, thick with the smell of wet earth and rotting leaves, and the ground sucked at my boots as I started up the path to the church. It wasn't far, a quarter mile maybe, but every step felt heavier, the mud clinging like it didn't want me to go. The bell rang again as I climbed, each toll sinking into my bones, slow and deliberate, like a call I wasn't meant to answer. The wind picked up, rustling the hedgerows, whispering through the grass, and I tightened my grip on the lantern, its light bouncing with my shaky steps. The church loomed ahead, its silhouette jagged against the sky, a relic of stone and shadow. Ivy smothered the walls, thick and wild, curling over broken windows like veins. The door was bolted shut, the wood splintered, rust bleeding from the iron into the grain. I circled it, my breath fogging in the cold, the lantern's beam catching. On shards of stained glass, saints with hollow eyes staring down, their colors dulled by time. The bell tolled again, louder now, reverberating through the ground, and I stopped, my heart pounding hard enough to hurt. I had to see, had to know. Found a shattered window near the base, knee-high, its frame rotted away, and crouched down, the damp soaking into my trousers. Peered inside, the lantern trembling in my hand. Dust swirled in the beam, thick and gray, and there it was, the bell, high in the tower, swaying back and forth. No ropes pulled it, no hands touched it, just swinging, slow and steady, ringing, into the emptiness. My throat tightened, a dry lump I couldn't swallow. It wasn't possible. Couldn't be. The air inside smelled of mold and decay. The pews warped and splintered, hymnals scattered like fallen leaves. No one had been here. In years, decades, and yet that bell moved. Then I heard them. Footsteps heavy and deliberate, crunching the gravel behind me. My blood ran cold. I spun around, lantern raised high, the light slashing through the dark, cutting shadows into sharp edges. Nothing. Just the muddy path winding. Back to the village, empty as a grave, the hedgerows still in the windless night. "Hello?" I called, my voice thin and shaky, swallowed by the silence. No answer, no sound but my own breathing, ragged and loud in my ears. The bell rang again, a deep, shuddering clang that shook the ground, and I felt it. A tug, a pull, like something wanted me inside, wanted me closer. My legs trembled, weak as water, and I took a step back, then another, the mud sucking at my boots. I didn't wait, couldn't. Turned and ran, the lantern swinging wild, light bouncing off the stones, the trees, the path blurring under my feet. Mud splashed my coat, my hands, my face, but I didn't stop until I burst through my cottage door, slamming it shut, fumbling with the lock until it clicked. Sank to the floor, panting, heart hammering against my ribs, and buried myself under the quilt, lantern still burning beside me. Listened, waited, prayed for silence. The ringing stopped after that, faded into the night like it had never been. I thought it was over, thought I'd dreamed it, conjured it from sleeplessness and village tales. The next day, I avoided the hill, stayed inside with my books, my tea, pretending it hadn't happened. But that night, midnight again, the whispers started, soft, insistent, weaving through the dark, slipping under the door, through the walls. "Eleanor, come back," they said, over and over, a chant that wouldn't stop. I pulled the quilt tighter, squeezed my eyes shut, told myself it was the wind, the house settling, anything but what I feared. But it grew louder, closer, voices overlapping, hissing my name. Last night I woke to a sound, crunching, soft and steady, and found dirt on my floor, a trail of it from the door to my bed, like someone had walked in while I slept. It smelled of earth, of the churchyard, damp and sour. I scrubbed it clean, hands shaking, the lantern flickering beside me. But this morning it was back, fresher, darker, a scattering of soil with a single ivy leaf pressed into it, its edges withered and black. I don't know what's calling me, don't know what rang that bell, but it's closer now. Last night I felt it, a weight on the quilt, a pressure at the foot of the bed, though nothing was there. The whispers are louder, sharper, and the dirt trails further each day, past the bed, now toward the window. I feel it watching, waiting, and I don't know how long I can keep it out. I saw him standing in the fog outside my pub. Then he walked through the wall like it was nothing. I'm Thomas, and I run this little pub in the Yorkshire Dales, a squat stone building that stood here longer than anyone can remember. It's called the Black Hare, named for some old fable the locals still mutter about over their pints. A tale of a shadow that hunts the moors. I'd taken over the place 6 months ago, leaving Leeds for a quieter life, drawn by the rugged hills, the endless sky. The pub was ancient, its beams blackened with age, its windows small and cloudy, the kind that rattle in the wind. That night, a fog had rolled in thick and fast, blanketing the Dales in a gray shroud so dense you couldn't see the road from the doorstep. It was late, past closing, the last of the regulars gone, their laughter fading into the mist. I was behind the bar, wiping down the counter with a rag that smelled of ale and vinegar, the fire burning low in the hearth, spitting embers onto the stone. The room was warm, heavy with the scent of damp wood and peat, and I was humming an old tune, half lost in my thoughts when I glanced out the window, just habit checking the night. That's when I saw him. A tall figure motionless just beyond the glass, staring at the pub. His coat hung heavy, dripping with mist, his face shadowed under a wide brim. I squinted, thinking he was some lost traveler, maybe a hiker caught in the fog. "We're closed, mate," I called, my voice muffled by the thick walls. He didn't move. Then he took a step forward and melted into the stone. I blinked, hard, the rag slipping from my hand, hitting the counter with a soft thud. My mind scrambled. Had to be the fog, I told myself, playing tricks, bending light in that strange way it does up here. I'd seen shapes in the mist before, trees turned to giants, rocks to crouching beasts. But this was different. The air turned cold, sharp as a blade, and the hairs on my neck stood up, prickling like needles. I grabbed a broom from the corner. Daft, I know, but my hands needed something to hold, and pushed the door open, the hinges creaking loud in the stillness. The fog swallowed me whole, thick and wet, curling around my face, clogging my throat. "Oi, who's out here?" I shouted, my voice flat, deadened by the haze. No answer, just the faint drip of water off the eaves, the rustle of wind across the moor. I swung the broom through the mist, half expecting to hit something solid, but it sliced empty air. My breath fogged in front of me, quick and shallow, and I shivered, the cold seeping through my jumper. Nothing out there, no figure, no tracks in the muddy yard. I ducked back inside, bolted the door with a heavy clunk, and muttered to myself about ghosts and too many late shifts. The fire crackled, mocking my nerves, and I forced a laugh, short and sharp, trying to shake it off. Then it started. Tap, 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 from inside the walls. Slow, deliberate, like footsteps pacing the stone, circling the room. I froze, broom still in hand, my knuckles white around the handle. The sound moved, behind the bar, up the stairs to the flat above, then back down, steady as a heartbeat. My mouth went dry, tongue sticking to the roof, and I swung around, eyes darting to the windows, locked tight, the latches rusted shut. The door, bolted, unmoved. No one could be in here. No one human, at least. The tapping stopped, and I let out a shaky breath, chest tight, figuring it was over. Pipes, maybe, or the wind rattling something loose. But then it came again, louder, closer, right behind the bar, a sharp rap that made the bottles clink. My heart leapt, a wild thud against my ribs, and I grabbed a lantern from under the counter, the wick flaring as I lit it. Stumbled down to the cellar, the stairs creaking under my weight, needing answers, needing this to make sense. The air down there was damp, thick with mildew and the sour tang of old ale, the shelves sagging under barrels coated in dust. I swung the lantern around, shadows leaping across the stone, and spotted a box in the corner, wooden, splintered, half buried under cobwebs. Pulled it out, the lid groaning as I pried it open, and there it was, a photo cracked and yellow, dated 1892. Him. The same man, same coat, same hollow stare, standing outside this pub, the black hair, the sign faint but clear behind him. My hands shook, the lantern flickering, casting his face in jagged light. I carried it upstairs, legs heavy, and burned it in the sink. Watched the edges curl, the paper blacken, the flames licking up his image until it was ash. Thought that'd end it, banish whatever I'd seen. It didn't. He's there every foggy night now, standing outside, watching me through the windows. I see him in the glass, his shape sharper each time, his stare heavier, like he's pressing against the panes. The regulars don't notice, don't see him. But I do. Last week, I locked up late, the fog thick as mud against the walls, the moor silent beyond. Went to bed exhausted, the flat above the bar creaking with every step. Woke to a sound, drip, 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 slow and steady like water on the floor. Rolled over half asleep and saw them. Muddy footprints, wet and fresh, leading from the pub door, up the stairs, to my bedside. Too big to be mine, the soles worn and strange like boots from another time. My stomach dropped. A cold weight, and I scrambled out of bed, lantern in hand, following them back down. The door was still locked, the windows shut, no way in. Scrubbed them away, hands trembling, the mud smearing under my rag. But they're back every morning now, fresher, closer to my pillow, the dirt damp and cold. Last night I heard the tapping again, inside my room, sharp and close, coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. I lit the lantern, swung it around. Nothing but shadows, but the air was heavy, thick with that damp, earthy smell. This morning, the footprint stopped at my head, a single muddy smear on the pillow beside me. I don't know what he wants, why he's here, why he won't leave, but he's not outside anymore. He's in the walls, in the air, in the dark, and every night the tapping gets louder. I heard giggling under my floorboards, but I live alone and I don't own any dolls. My name's Charlotte, and I just bought this fixer-upper in Dorset, a crooked little house on the edge of a village where the sea wind carries salt and secrets. I'd found it cheap, a steal, the agent said, its roof sagging, its walls stained with damp. But I saw potential in its bones, a chance to start over after a messy divorce. That first night I was unpacking, boxes scattered across the kitchen, the air thick with dust and the faint must of old wood. The place creaked constantly, settling, I told myself, its floors uneven, its windows rattling in their frames. I'd lit a lamp, the bulb flickering, casting a warm glow over the chaos, and I was humming an old song, trying to drown out the quiet that pressed in from every corner. That's when I heard it, faint childlike laughter bubbling up from beneath the floor. I stopped cold, kettle still in hand, steam curling around my fingers, and tilted my head. It came again, soft and playful, echoing under my feet like a secret game. I laughed too, a nervous stuttering sound, figuring it was mice, maybe rats, scrabbling in the crawl space. Old houses like this were full of noises, weren't they? But it didn't stop. Kept going every few minutes, a giggle that danced through the stillness, light and eerie. I shook it off, set the kettle on the hob, kept unpacking, plates clinking, mugs rattling, a chipped teapot I'd brought from my old life. But the giggling grew louder, sharper, cutting through the hiss of boiling water like a blade. My skin crawled, a shiver prickling up my arms. It wasn't mice, couldn't be. The sound was too human, too deliberate. I tapped the floor with my heel. Thud, thud, hoping to scare it off, whatever it was. Silence fell, heavy and sudden, and for a moment I thought I'd won. Then it started again, right under me, fast and giddy, a burst of laughter that made my heart lurch. I grabbed a torch from my bag, the beam shaky in my grip, and swept it across the kitchen. The floorboards were warped, stained with age, and one near the sink looked loose, its edges curling up like a smirk. I knelt, the wood cold against my knees, my breath fogging in the chill, and wedged a butter knife under it. Pried it up, slow, the nails groaning like a living thing, splintering as they gave way. Shone the light down, and there it was, nestled in the dust. A porcelain doll. Its face was cracked, a spider web of fractures running across its cheek, its eyes painted black, flat, empty voids, and its dress stained a rusty red, the fabric stiff and brittle. My stomach twisted, a sour knot tightening. Who'd leave something like that here, hidden under the floor? I reached down, hesitant, my fingers brushing its cold, smooth cheek, and pulled it out, dust cascading off it like ash. It was heavier than it looked, the porcelain chipped along its arms, the paint flaking from those dead eyes. I turned it, over the lamplight catching on its cracks, and felt a chill settle into my bones. I didn't like it, didn't want it anywhere near me. Stood up, legs shaky, and carried it outside, the night air biting my hands, sharp with the tang of salt from the nearby sea. The bin was by the gate, rusted and dented, and I dumped it in, slamming the lid with a clang that echoed down the empty street. Went back inside, locked the door, every bolt, every latch, telling myself it was nothing, just junk from the last tenant. Some kid's forgotten toy. Washed my hands, scrubbed them until they were raw, and went to bed. The mattress, sagging under me, the springs creaking with every move. Tried to sleep, eyes heavy, but the giggling came back. Louder, angrier, rattling up through the floorboards like it was right beneath me. I shot upright, torch in hand, heart pounding hard enough to hurt, and stumbled to the kitchen. Tore up. The same board, empty, just dust and shadows. Checked the bin at first light, the sky pale and gray. Nothing. The doll was gone. I lost it then. Panic clawing at my chest, breath coming in sharp gasps. Ran back inside, searched every corner, every box, every cupboard. Nothing. No sign of it. That evening, I dragged the bin to the garden shed, found an old can of petrol, tucked behind a rake, and went looking. It was there again, under the floor, same spot, head turned toward me like it had crawled back in the night, its black eyes glinting in the torchlight. I didn't think, just acted. Yanked it out, the porcelain cold and slick in my hands, and hauled it to the shed. Doused it in petrol, the fumes stinging my nose, and struck a match with trembling fingers. Watched it burn, the flames licking up its dress, melting those black eyes into oozing pools, the crackling loud in the quiet night. The smoke was thick, sour, curling into the sky, and I stayed until it was ash, a charred smear on the ground. Went inside, locked everything again, scrubbed my hands until they bled, and collapsed into bed, exhausted, telling myself it was over. Had to be over. But it wasn't. That night, I heard footsteps overhead, small, quick, pacing the attic above my room. The ceiling creaked, dust sifting down in thin streams, and the air filled with a faint, sharp smell, smoke, acrid and biting. I lay there frozen, eyes locked on the ceiling, telling myself it was the wind, the house, anything but that doll. The footsteps stopped, and I let out a shaky breath, but then they started again. Closer, heavier, thudding right above my head. I grabbed the torch, swung it up, the beam trembling, nothing but plaster and shadows. Slept with the light on, fitful and restless, waking every hour to that sound. Tap, 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 like tiny feet on wood. Next night, It was worse. The giggling returned, soft at first, then loud, echoing from under the bed, the walls, the ceiling, overlapping into a chorus that wouldn't stop. I checked the shed at dawn. The ashes were gone, the ground bare, as if nothing had burned there. Last night I woke to a weight on my chest, a pressure that pinned me down, rolled over, gasping, and found a scorch mark on my pillow, shaped like a tiny hand, fingers curled, the fabric singed black. Checked the attic today. Empty, just cobwebs and dust, but the giggling's back, closer now under my bed, in the walls, everywhere. Last night I felt it, a cold touch on my leg, light but firm, and the lamp flickered, dimmed, died. This morning, the scorch marks were on the floor, a trail leading to the loose board. I don't think it's gone, I don't think it ever will be. I thought it was my shadow stretching across the moor, until it started moving without me. I'm Henry, and I was hiking across Dartmoor that evening, the sun sinking low, painting the hills in streaks of gold and crimson. I'd come out here, often since moving to Devon, drawn by the wildness of it, the vast, empty sweeps of heather and stone, the silence that swallowed everything but the wind. That day, I'd set out late, my boots crunching over the uneven ground, the air crisp, with the scent of damp earth and gorse. My pack was light, just water, a map, a torch, the kind of gear you carry when you know the paths well. The moor stretched out endless around me, its ridges sharp against the fading light, and I was alone, or thought I was. My shadow stretched, a head long and thin across the grass, shifting with the sun's angle as it dipped toward the horizon. Normal, right? Routine. But then it twitched. I stopped dead, mid-step, my breath catching, staring down at it. It grew taller, sharper, sliding toward me while I stood still, boots planted in the heather. The wind dropped, sudden and complete, and the air turned thick, heavy, like the moor itself was holding its breath, watching me. I shook my head, rubbed my eyes with a gloved hand. Exhaustion, I told myself. Too many hours on the trail. The light playing tricks as dusk crept in. Took a step forward, slow, watching it follow, and for a moment it matched me again. Obedient, tethered to my feet. Relief flickered, weak and fleeting, a whisper in my mind. See, nothing strange. Then it darted, sideways, fast, weaving between rocks while I froze, my shadow breaking free. My chest tightened, breath shallow, a cold sweat prickling under my jacket. It wasn't mine anymore, wasn't natural. I shouted, "Oi, who's there?" Voice, cracking, flung into the vastness, swallowed by the silence. Nothing answered. No birds, no rustle of wind, just the moor stretching out, empty and still. The shadow stretched again, impossibly long, curling around a boulder like a snake, then snapping back toward me, its edges jagged, claw-like. I backed, up. Boots slipping on moss, heart thudding hard against my ribs, and it loomed larger, darker, swallowing the fading light. The sun sank lower, bleeding red across the hills, and I felt it, eyes I couldn't see, a weight pressing down, watching, me from somewhere out there or in there in that shadow. I turned, started walking, fast, not running yet, telling myself to stay calm, to think. The torch was in my pack, but I didn't stop to grab it, kept moving, eyes flicking to the ground. The shadow darted ahead, sliding under my feet, mocking, me stretching into shapes no human could cast, long arms, a head that bent wrong. My pulse raced, a frantic drumbeat, and I broke into a run, legs burning, lungs screaming, the moor blurring past, rocks jutting like teeth, gorse clawing at. My trousers, a stream I splashed through, icy water soaking me to the knees. I glanced back, nothing but empty hills, the horizon swallowed by dusk. Yet it was there, stretching across the ground, growing, flowing like ink. I tripped, fell hard, knees slamming into stone, a sharp pain shooting up my legs. It towered. Over me then, a black mass blotting out the sky, its edges rippling, and it whispered my name. Henry. A voice like rustling leaves, dry and endless, seeping into my ears, my skull. I scrambled up, hands scraping rock, torch swinging wild from my pack as I yanked it free. The beam cut through the dark, weak against the shadow, and I ran. Again, heart hammering, not stopping until I hit the village a mile off, collapsing against a wall, gasping, mud and sweat streaking my face. The shadow was gone, or so I thought. I made it home, to the small cottage I'd rented on the edge of the moor, locked the door, double-checked the bolts, stayed up all night, torch in hand, watching the windows. The moor was silent beyond the glass, the night pressing in, but I couldn't shake it. Those whispers, that shape, the way it moved. Thought I'd escaped, left it out there among the stones. But now, every dusk, my shadow stretches longer than it should, farther than the light allows, even indoors. The lamp flickers and it bends, twists, moves when I don't, curling up the walls across the ceiling. I've tried leaving, spent a night in a pub in town, surrounded by noise, people, but it followed, stretching from the streetlights, pooling under my chair. Last week I lit a candle, the flame trembling in the dark, and caught it in the glow. A jagged slash of a grin forming where a mouth shouldn't be, wide and sharp, glinting like wet teeth. I blew it out, sat in blackness, listening to my own breathing, shallow and quick. The whispers come now, not just on the moor, but here in the house. Henry. Soft, insistent, from the corners, the floor, the walls. This morning I found scratches on the floor, thin, deep, claw-like, trailing from the door to my chair. The wood splintered as if something dragged itself across. Last night I woke to a weight, a pressure on my legs, heavy and cold, though the room was empty. The torch died, batteries fresh, and the shadow loomed over me, grinning in the dark. It's not my shadow anymore, not just light and absence. It's something else, something that knows me, hunts me, and every night those scratches get closer to my bed. I heard 3 knocks on my door at midnight, but when I opened it, no one was there. My name's Abigail, and I live in this terraced house in Manchester, a narrow brick box squeezed between neighbors and a row of sagging rooftops. I'd moved here after uni, chasing a job, a fresh start, drawn by the hum of the city, the way it never truly sleeps. The house was old, Victorian, the letting agent said, its walls stained with time, its floors groaning under every step. But it was cheap, close to work, mine. The knocking started a month ago. 3 sharp raps, always at midnight, loud enough to jolt me from sleep, cutting through the distant rumble of traffic. First few nights I'd stumble to the door, bleary-eyed, peek through the peephole. Nothing but the empty street. Streetlights buzzing faint and yellow, shadows pooling under parked cars. I'd shuffle back to bed, muttering about kids messing, or the wind rattling the frame. City noises, I told myself, nothing more. But it kept happening. Night after night, precise as a metronome, bang, 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 always 3, always midnight. Last week it got louder, angrier, the wood trembling under each blow, the sound echoing down the hall. I'd lie there, eyes locked on the ceiling, counting 1, 2, 3, waiting for it to stop, my heart thudding in the dark. It didn't stop. It waited, patient, persistent. I couldn't take it anymore, couldn't keep pretending it was normal. Last night, I decided to face it. Pulled a blanket around my shoulders, the wool rough against my skin, and sat by the door, perched on a chair I'd dragged from the kitchen. The clock ticked slow, 11:57, 11:58, its red digits glowing in the dimness. My hands sweated, gripping a mug of tea I hadn't touched, the liquid cold and bitter by now. I watched the seconds crawl, 11:59, and held my breath. The house silent but for the faint hum of pipes, the occasional car outside. Midnight hit, and there it was. Bang, bang, bang. 3 knocks, sharp as gunshots, rattling the door in its frame. I jumped, tea sloshing over the rim, soaking my sleeve, and stood, legs shaky, the blanket slipping to the floor. Peered through the peephole again. Empty, just the street stretching quiet under the lamps, shadows shifting as a breeze stirred litter in the gutter. The air felt heavy, thick, pressing in around me. I grabbed the knob, hesitated, every nerve screaming to leave it alone. but I had to know. Flung the door open, ready to shout, to scream at whoever it was. Nothing. Cold wind rushed past, prickling my skin, carrying the faint tang of exhaust and wet pavement. The street was still, too still. No footsteps, no movement. Then I saw them wet footprints, small like a child's, glistening on the step under the porch light. They trailed inside, past me, down the hall toward my bedroom, faint and muddy on the worn carpet. My throat closed up, a dry lump I couldn't swallow. I shut the door, slow, the lock clicking loud in the silence, and grabbed a torch from the kitchen drawer, the beam trembling in my hand. Followed the prints step by step, my socks soaking up the damp, the carpet squelching faintly underfoot. They were fresh, too fresh, mud smeared in tiny toes, bare feet leading to my room. I pushed the door open, hinges creaking slow and low, the torchlight sweeping across, bed unmade, quilt tangled, wardrobe shut tight. No one there. Knelt by the bed, heart pounding hard enough to hurt, shone the light underneath, dust and shadows, a stray sock, nothing else. The prints stopped at my pillow, a faint smudge on the cotton, like something had stood there, lingered, watching me sleep. My stomach twisted, a cold weight sinking in, and I backed out, slammed the door, spent the night on the couch, torch clutched tight, its beam fixed on the hall. No more knocks that night, just silence, heavy and wrong. Thought it was over, prayed it was, clung to that hope as the city woke beyond the windows. This morning I woke to a sound, drip, drip, like water on the floor, slow and steady. Rolled over, groggy, the torch still glowing faintly beside me, and saw them, muddy handprints on the wall above the couch, smeared across the peeling paint, small and fresh, fingers splayed like they'd pressed in hard. My breath caught, a sharp gasp, and I scrambled up, the blanket tangling around my legs. They weren't there last night. I'd have seen them, felt them, grabbed a rag, soap, scrubbed them off, hands trembling, the water turning brown as it dripped down the wall, the smell of wet earth thick and sour. Locked the bedroom door, shoved a chair under the knob, told myself it was done. Had to be. But tonight, they're back, more of them, closer to the couch, fingers curled like they're reaching, the mud darker, wetter. The knocks haven't returned, but I hear it now, breathing, soft and ragged in the corners of the room, behind the walls, under the floor. Last night, I felt it, a cold touch on my ankle, light as a breeze but firm, tugging gently, and the torch flickered, dimmed, died. Sat in the dark listening, the breathing louder, closer, a rhythm that matched my own. This morning the handprints were smaller, child-sized, precise, pressed into the cushion beside me, the fabric damp and cold. Found a smear on the bedroom door too, like something tried the handle, left its mark. Whatever it is, it's not outside anymore, it's here in the air, in the walls, in the dark, and every night that breathing gets closer to my ear. Well, you've just survived the face in the window, the bell that rings alone, the man in the fog, the doll under the floor, the shadow on the moor, and the midnight knocks. But if you don't want these curses creeping into your own life, here's what you need to do. Subscribe to A Mysteries Beyond Death right now. Smash that like button, turn on the notification bell so you never miss a tale, and drop a comment below. Tell me which story kept you up tonight. It's the only way to keep these horrors at bay, and it helps this channel grow. Don't tempt fate. Do it now, or the next knock might be at your door.